John, how do you think about sort of identifying organizations that ought to be taken to the donor network, and where do you go to get a sense for how their results might compare to others in their same space?
Right, and what we're trying to do to modestly improve that. So we've been racing around for about a year since we got money, just seeing every nonprofit that we could find, most of which have been referred to us by people who we've approached on the donor side. So at least for a while, sort of wading through stuff is been our sort of strategy. I think we take a slightly different view than Edna McConnell Clark. I mean, I think that we accept the basic what works clearinghouse hierarchy of evidence that has rightly or wrongly been imported from evidence-based medicine, and would say, like, look, let's be honest about what's out there, and let's look at what's out there, and let's see if we can understand it and frame it for donors without being prescriptive about saying, if it's not this, we can't know anything, because some of that is value laden. I mean, take Teach for America as a perfect example. You know, if you don't, our view is, if donors don't fundamentally buy into the mission of an organization we show them, there's no amount of evidence that will move them either way. So if you don't basically believe in this fifth column of education reformers, if you don't say, aha, look at Michelle Rhee, why should we spend a lot of time talking to you about how the teachers and the students in those classes are doing? Because TFA is not going to be for you. But let's talk to you about iMentor. So we sort of, we think of our job mostly as conviction building, transparency, and calibration rather than proof. If you sort of see what I'm saying there, and in terms of getting, in our small way, getting this knowledge out into the world of the wealthy. Busy wealthy people will not download and read white papers, and they just won't. And as a force of will, even if they did read them, which they won't, for a moment they'll think they might act on it, and then they go back into their busy day, and it's lost. You can read a nation's at risk 100 times and never do a thing. It doesn't move the pen. So we've tried to think about, could we organize? We've done one convenings where you bring the best or some of the best nonprofit leaders together with some of the best social scientists together with some wealthy donors, and actually sort of talk about these issues with the secret agenda being education, but without it being white paper driven, because we just don't think wealthy people are motivated by white papers. We'll see. There seems to be interest in that. They're coming, but whether it motivates action, I don't know.
And I mean, I would just add, I think, at the Clark Foundation, we definitely look at a range of things. We're not as narrow as just the random control trial evaluation. I think, on the end of our spectrum, where we're talking about organizations that are really scaling up, then we're really kind of particular about that. But we have a whole range of organizations in our fund that are at different stages of development that we look at all different kinds of proof, from having really strong internal systems to having some external evaluation. So we use a lot of those same sources too, and that's just one aspect of what we look for when we look for an organization. I mean, it's there's so many other important facets, and I think you would probably agree too. It's the leadership is really kind of the two primary things that you really look for when you're looking at an organization.
There seems like a growing momentum. First of all, we talk a lot about the tension between this notion of having an objective outcome, measurable impact, versus buying into the theory of change of an organization and investing in the leadership. But just talk more about sort of weighing those tensions, because there seems to be an abstract notion that you ought to be able to compare at least apple to apple among organizations. And sort of how do you do that, and what do you look at, and sort of what's a...
We've been trying to do this for years. I mean, we only have 20 organizations in our fund, and they're all focused on serving youth, but they're all different. They all have different approaches, and they're all ultimately striving for very similar outcomes. But, I mean, the ones that we're working with are, looking for high school graduation, or looking for transition out of the foster care system, or, so there are very similar things. And it's been really challenging, and I can't say that we've cracked that nut yet. So, but
do you have sort of a matrix of high school graduation, and here's our 20 groups, and here's their results against each other, and the cost per?
We're just starting to build a rubric of that kind, and what's really challenging is it's just, every organization, again, is different and is doing it in different ways. And, we focus on such a wide age range from 9 to 24 that, an organization that's serving middle school kids is going to focus on academic achievement, right? And, a program serving high school kids is going to focus on high school graduation. And so it's just really hard to do with just 20 organizations. But how we're starting to frame it up is we're identifying all of the studies in, say, the education space that have the highest proof point, right? So that's the top, not many organizations are going to get there. And then we're going to go for the 75th percentile and just say, so now here's, where this kind of high bar is, but there's room to be above or below. And then it gives you a basis of comparison. Because I think, what's also happening is, our fund in and of itself is becoming more competitive. So it's not just organizations' performance, but it's about, new organizations coming into the fund, right?
So when you say 75th percentile, it's a 75th percentile for what? Like what kid?
So if you're saying, this is really early stage too, you have to say we're just building it now, but if you have high school graduation and you have one intervention that the best they can do, I'm just kind of, making this up, right? The best they can do is graduate 95% of their kids.
Yeah.
And then you get another range of organizations that their interventions band somewhere around 80 or something like that. And so this way, other organizations you're looking at, do they fall between 80 and 95? And is there opportunity to improve that then? So to get them up to the highest point.